Nationhood and religion are two ideas that our brain is programmed to gravitate towards. And because of that, they are extremely powerful political tools to polarize society. I think it opens up very interesting questions of what could happen if society started to cease to see these boundaries between one and the other. And certainly psychedelics tap into that space, but I think other things also tap into that sort of space.
Next up is a session that, I'm personally absolutely fascinated by. It's about the interconnection between psychedelics, serotonin, and stress, mental health, the entire spectrum of human mental well-being. And this is an extremely surprise interconnection because in the past and for the longest time in modern world, since the 60s, psychedelics have been seen as the great evil. It was driven underground in Nixon's time. But yet it is now making a comeback as the wonder drug for both stress and mental health. And there's just one statistic talking about this era of anxiety and opportunity, that just in the last 5-6 years, the incidence of mental health issues have gone up in America by 67% for young children and young people, young women in particular. India itself has amazingly terrifying mental health statistics that 1 out of 4 children, particularly in the teenage group between 13 to 15, suffer from depression. There are more than 300 million people that suffer from depression, and that those are people who are directly impacted. But when you talk about the penumbra of family and friends around, the numbers are even larger. So here's the surprise hero entrance. Can LSD, ayahuasca, mescaline, drugs that, as I said, were driven underground, suddenly be the wonder therapy that we were looking for? To discuss that and to give us insights into this mysterious, magical, fascinating world, we have a cutting-edge neuroscientist in India who's leading research on psychedelics. She's an award-winning researcher, and she's looking at this intersection between this molecule that we have within us, serotonin, which is the mood setter, and psychedelics and stress. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Vidita Vaidya on stage. Vidita, you're literally the most fascinating conversation. It's the great forbidden. But before we go into the world of psychedelics, I want to start now from closer home. You've been studying the landscape of stress. You won amazing awards for it, the Infosys Award, and other awards recently, a big $7 million a year to go deeper into this landscape. So first of all, can you tell us what happens to the human body in a situation of stress? What are all the different factories that kick in?
Okay. So we all have, first of all, thanks very much for having me here. And it's been a smorgasbord of amazing talks this morning that I've been sitting and listening in on. Stress responses are absolutely vital for each and every one of us. We have them because we need them to survive. And we design them across evolutionary time and sub-selected the ones that are best for us. So think about it as, let's go back, and I love Sapolsky's analogy for this, but if you were out in hunter-gatherer societies and you were prey for a lot of species, you either had to find your own food, so you were predator, or you were prey. So in those moments, very acute and rapid decisions of physical stress is what your body was primed to respond to. And when you're stressed, you activate your hypothalamus, which sits at the base of your brain, which activates your pituitary to secrete a hormone, which then goes into your bloodstream, activates the adrenal glands, which then secrete cortisol, and cortisol goes all over your body, essentially delivering the message to different parts of your body to say, listen, you need to prepare. So it could be, shifting the glucose to your muscles, because either you need to run to catch something or run away from something. It also shuts off your digestion because you'll only eat and digest if you live to see the other meal, literally. And it shuts off your reproductive pathways, because that's, again, something that you can do over a period of time. So the system is beautifully designed for rapid, fast mobilization for survival in acute situations. And that system has helped us survive as a species. It's helped multiple other vertebrates survive as species. But we now use it in very different contexts, right? You might use it for whether you got sufficient number of likes on your social media posts, and if you didn't, you might still have the full-fledged cortisol response, but there's no ending that, and there's no control over that situation. So I think what's happened is that a system that was really beautifully designed is being hijacked by contexts for which it was not optimally designed, which is chronic social factors that drive stress. And so that's literally what we are seeing, which is why we see over the last 150 years a significant increase in stress-associated disorders, because infectious diseases to some degree we have control over, but we don't over stress-associated disorders. And that's really obvious when you look at what we die of today versus what we died of like 100 years ago. Lifespan has gone up. We talked about that earlier this morning, but so has stress-associated disease. Everything that kills us today is pretty much either stress-driven, stress-worsened, or stress-precipitated. Yeah.
So, before I take you into the realm of psychedelics, this is the arena of stress, and you describe this reaction. But this work that you're doing also pertains to the entire spectrum of mental health, So can you give us some understanding about the factories of that? Do we even understand where the whole, whether schizophrenia or autism or any of the disorders, the spectrum disorders, do you actually have an understanding of how it works?
So we have a rudimentary understanding is the best way I would put it. I can give you simple answers, but they wouldn't be honest. In that if you ask me precisely what causes depression and what is exactly going wrong in depression, we can definitely describe the symptomatology, but we can't nail down the precise circuits from individual to individual that have gone haywire that produce a state of a depressed mind. We have a reasonable understanding, but not one that is rock solid. In any case, most medicine is largely palliative and very rarely curative. And in this situation, we are really groping in the dark, because we discovered these molecules by serendipity, and we've just been able to tweak them over the years, but haven't really had a major breakthrough in the way we treat psychiatric disorders. We classify them because we must classify, but we're, again, very poor at classifying. These are syndromal illnesses that run the risk of putting them into a bin to try to treat them, but then we don't really. So I would say we have some understanding of the circuits, but not a deep understanding of precisely what drives the disease condition.
Right. Again, I'd like to share with the audience that, this is a really startling statistic that 30% of those suffering from depression are actually drug resistant, so, and the numbers are huge of people suffering from depression. So this makes this whole landscape of new discovery very, very important. But now to come to the psychedelics, Vidita. It's positioned as a new science, but it's not, and that's a fascinating. So can you tell us a little bit about, what was old about the way psychedelics were used, and what is new neuroscience discovering about psychedelics that makes us look at it as a wonder drug?
I think we're rediscovering what our indigenous populations and ancestral cultures have utilized in a perhaps more reverential form than perhaps the way we are doing it right now. So for as long as human beings have walked this planet, we have consumed psychoactive substances of some kind or the other, and most of them are plant-derived. And so much the same way, psychedelics have been consumed, at least as best understood from some amount of understanding. It's about 10,000 to 8,000 to 10,000 years. So it's been in use for a long time. They have been used in sort of the Pan-Amazonian cultures in religious ceremonies, and there is a strong reverence towards these plant-derived molecules, partly because of the way those societies interact with nature, and their engagement with nature is a far richer, deeper, and meaningful one than perhaps a more exploitative one, which is what our generation and our society as it stands today has in terms of its equation with nature. So there's a really interesting relationship, and these molecules have been used. But the shamans used it with great degree of respect, and with a desire to know that they are very, very potent in their effects. So people went through cleansing ceremonies, etc., before prior utilization. And then it was done under controlled circumstances with a specific set and setting. We just landed on them. I mean, when I say we, I mean Western civilization landed on it and then reintroduced it to the world in a sense, in a packaged manner. And LSD is perhaps the big breakthrough, and that happens in 1930s, late 40s, and that was just a fluke attempt to try to make a effective antibiotic from an ergot alkaloid, and ended up synthesizing LSD, which sat on a shelf for a long time till Albert Hofmann gave it to himself and figured out that he had basically made LSD. But currently, where we stand is that post the 1960s, 70s, where there was just a shutdown on the utilization of psychedelics and also on research with psychedelics, it set the field back by a good 30, 40 years, because I think research should have continued. I think there's real room for regulation and there is value to regulation, but I think shutting down research prevents our ability to explore perhaps the most interesting molecules we have on the planet. If you think the holy grail is consciousness, then we don't have anything that allows us to interrogate human consciousness other than our own mind. These drugs allow you to shift consciousness, which provides an incredibly powerful tool to also study the human brain. So they should have been at least utilized for research purposes. I still think there's a cautionary tale here for us in terms of how we navigate the next 20 years with these molecules. But I think we are running in full speed without perhaps the same reverence and cautionary awareness that we could absolutely inherit from more traditional practitioners.
So, Vidita, it's fascinating that psychedelics has this kind of, so, the same way as I asked you what happens to the human body when we face stress, would love you to share with the audience what happens to the human body when you take psychedelics, because the experience that people come back with, and Michael Pollan wrote this book and it's a Netflix series as well. And again, in the Indian context, it's fascinating because the experiences that people come back with are very mystical. And you feel that your ego shuts down, that you have synesthesia, colors and sounds merge. You can hear color and you can see sound, and you feel one with the universe and you are one with the Brahman, and there's undifferentiated love. So there's a very mystical experience that happens. And I found it very fascinating that scientists like you say that when you take psychedelics, your default mode network shuts down. And that default mode network is very equivalent to the way we describe ego, So, what is it? What does the psychedelics do to your brain?
Think of it like a ruminative network. So in this room, right, people are sitting. Some of them might be just still digesting their lunch or having had a cup of coffee. Maybe at least a percentage are listening actively to us. And some are thinking about what's happening next day and what's going to happen on Monday and what's still left to do. If you're in a ruminative mode where you are reflecting on something where you are at the center and everything is with that self-referential framework, that's your default mode network. It's active when you are at a state of just not actively attending to something, but just self-referential. Psychedelics flip you out of that brain state into a much more executive network-like state where you're actually engaging, and yourself at the center becomes a little less relevant because you're now looking at the world around you in a very different way. So this is what we think happens within the human brain. At least that's what we understand from imaging studies. I can tell you, I work with rodents, I work with rats and mice. I wish I could ask them what they were experiencing, because it's very obvious when they have taken a psychedelic, given them a psychedelic molecule. You can see a clear shift in behavior. You can see a clear shift in even looking at the animal, you can tell. But I can't ask them that question. So I can tell you what's going on in the brain when these drugs are on board. And there are many interesting things happening. There are rapid plastic responses in multiple circuits in that synapses form and break and form and break nonstop, which happens in any case, even when we're learning something or doing something. But they're really driven up under the influence of a psychedelic. There's a fundamental change in bioenergetics in the brain, which is the utilization of energy to just do whatever work the cell requires. There are a variety of changes in terms of a decline in anxiety-like behavior in animals, which has also been reported in humans. So there's a ton of stuff going on, and these molecules are complex molecules, so they're hitting many different kinds of receptors. The receptor I study is the serotonin 2A receptor, and these are they're targeting that particular receptor.
Right. So, we're going to come to the serotonin, and the serotonin is this hero molecule in our body, which is the mood stabilizer, and psychedelics hit serotonin, which was the big discovery that Vidita's, lab and Vidita have had, and that's what she won the award for. But I'm going to come to the serotonin bit in a while. Vidita, just to go back to the psychedelics, you said that a particular part of our brain shuts down, and different parts of your brain start firing up, or synapses start firing up. But when you have this experience of love or of undifferentiated, like you're part of the plant and you're part of the universe and your ego dies down, it comes back to this conversation about consciousness, or what the directors and creative people were saying. Is it then just neurochemical, that different parts of your brain which you're not normally using wake up? So then is all spirituality, is all of that just chemistry? Is it just neuroscience? Or is it that you're entering is it a door into your own brain, or is it a door out into another reality?
I think it's both. I think that the nervous system has within it the ability to feel connection. And we see this with multiple species, but we see it with us as well. We see it in our ability to connect to another human being. We can see it in our ability to feel another human being's state. And what do I mean by that? I'll give you an example of a really good discovery, which perhaps was one of the breakthrough discoveries in neuroscience. It was the discovery of mirror neurons, which was made by Rizzolatti. And what he was doing is he was watching monkeys perform a very simple task. Let's pick up a peanut, let's move this bar, and there are cells in your premotor cortex which fire as the animal starts even thinking about that task, and then it switches on the motor cortex to allow you to do this task, right? So this you heard about from Daniel Petrino, which is you can use those signals to then drive a movement just by tapping into that. Much the same way from the monkey brain, you can record as the animal, actually picks this up. So what Rizzolatti did was a really cool observation. He was watching these animals, and to set up the experiment, he had to pick up the thing and place it down there anyway. So he was placing it, and every time he did that, he found these cells firing even before the monkey had even done anything or even finished the task, and he kept thinking this is noise. But what it was mirror neurons in the monkey brain responding to Rizzolatti's action. So as you perform a task, my brain is watching you perform that task, connecting to what part of your brain would be active, and now my brain is active in response to that, without anything ever having been orally communicated or even finishing the task. That's super interesting, because that tells us that our nervous system has the ability to tap into the actions of another nervous system and actively respond. So I think that the nervous system has the underpinnings of being able to connect with not just our own species, but with multiple other species, to the planet, to our sense of awareness of where we are in this time and space. Meditation would do that to you. Perhaps people in deep exercise tap into that as well. I think psychedelics also tap into that. So I don't think this is necessarily only, there are altered perceptions and realities that are specifically unique to different kinds of psychedelics. But I think it's tapping into what already exists in the nervous system. So I like to think of it as both a window into the universe, but also a universe which is allowing you to peek back into your own brain.
Right. I'm going to come back to this because it's still very mysterious and fascinating. But also that when you're talking about psychedelics calming the ego, we want to understand how it becomes therapy, for stress or for mental health. So your discovery was that psychedelics specifically hits the serotonin receptor, and the serotonin is our mood stabilizer. It's literally the guardian of well-being in our body. So what happens there, and what is then stopping these drugs from being put out? What is the negative impacts there?
Right. Okay, so I wasn't the one who discovered that psychedelics bind to the 2A receptor. That's been known for a while. What we found was that serotonin and psychedelics through this receptor, directly change the mitochondrial numbers in your brain. Now that matters because your brain is a super energy consuming organ, right? 20% of everything you're eating is going to support this 1.5 kg structure in your brain. It's using most of the energy you're utilizing, and that's even at rest. So it's very, very actively consuming energy. What we found is that serotonin, as well as the psychedelics, through this receptor can change the number of mitochondria you have in the brain, in specific parts of the brain, and the ability to utilize this energy, consume oxygen, and produce ATP, essentially energy molecules that allow you to do work within neurons. So this was the discovery. Now, why is this interesting? It's interesting because it tells us that this is likely an old evolutionary effect of serotonin that predates us, predates anything that looked like us, predates early metazoan evolution. There were no neurons to speak of when serotonin showed up on the planet. There were no organisms with neurons to speak of. So serotonin in 3 billion years is the expected sort of timeline we're talking about. It showed up as a molecule on the planet along with our earliest abilities in plants to trap light and convert it into food. When plants do that, a side effect of that is that they produce free radicals, which they have to clean up. And because they have to clean up, they have to have lots of antioxidants to clean up the stuff that comes in the process of producing the food. Serotonin is thought to be one of those early evolutionary experiments which would be like an antioxidant. And what we seem to have done then over time is co-opt it in evolution as a neurotransmitter. And what our work is pointing to is that, hey, even in the human brain, because we see it in human neurons, you see it in rodent neurons, it's going back to actually allow neurons to buffer oxidative stress, protect them, drive up their energy function, and so this was the discovery. Now coming back to the question that you asked, which was, why is this relevant, right? Like, is this important? It's important because I think these molecules, whether we like it or not, are going to, it's like the Pandora's box. We're going to have them out there faster than we perhaps should, partly because there is a burning need for new therapy. And if you have 30% of patients who do not respond to anything, you have an absolute urgent requirement. Unfortunately, we don't have anything currently that's so powerful that we are sitting on it, which we can release. Psychedelics are molecules that we know do have potent effects, but they don't come, they're a two-edged sword. They come with some serious risks, which we haven't yet fully identified and understood. And my worry is that we will open the Pandora's box without having done enough amount of research to understand what we're dealing with. But it's the tussle between patient requirement for the better need of therapy versus the need to say, guard the steps with which you release this.
Right. So is it that, you know, when you're saying, just to close the triangle, right, you're saying that when you take psychedelics, it shuts down this self-referential part of your brain. So it allows you to reconstruct your consciousness or reconstruct your identity using serotonin. I'm just
right.
like...
I think it allows you to reframe your space in the universe as you understand it. I mean, we all feel moments of profound awe when we sit down and look at a sky. There is an instantaneous awareness of how small we are with reference to the entire universe. And once you have that scale of understanding, the scale of your problems seem minuscule in comparison to your existence on this one planet, in this time, in this space. I think transiently you have a chance to access that using psychedelics, and that can last while the drug is on board. The question is, how do you then behave once you come off of it? Many people who have taken it describe it as a monumental, life-altering event. But there are also examples of drug-induced psychosis where a family history of bipolar disorder or schizophrenia may potentially drive a psychotic break in some individuals on consumption of psychedelics. So there is that obvious risk. I think they're very, very interesting molecules. They need to be looked at very, very deeply. But I think there are other ways to do this as well. And I think meditation is certainly one, exercise is one. And I think then there's room, I mean, I know as a scientist it will sound absurd that I'm saying this, but faith is one. And it seems to work for people in profound moments of grief, profound moments of loss, there's room for all ways to access healing. And it doesn't necessarily always have to be pharmacological.
Right. But again, we're just so short on time, but Andrew Newberg is a neuroscientist who's been looking at consciousness and psychedelics and mystical experiences. And he was going to come as well, but he couldn't make it. But, again, coming back to that then, that whether it's meditation, whether it's, transcendental experiences, whether it's psychedelics, is it all then just showing that it is, even in meditation, you change your breathing, or in fasting, you change your biochemistry. So I'm just asking you, Vidita, that I know you don't have a 100% answer, but then is all this pointing to that consciousness finally is a sort of chemical condition of the brain, an altered chemical condition of the brain?
You're asking me the monumentally most difficult question you can possibly ask a neuroscientist, because we still have fundamental questions of what exactly constitutes the material basis of consciousness, right? Which is what it's coming down. I mean, material by itself becomes interesting because you and I are not the same material we were 2 weeks ago, and we will certainly not be the same material we are 2 years down the road. So if you want to take a very materialist position, that material is by definition recycling. So then the question of what is it that we imbue and use the word, I think it's self-awareness, but then this comes into spaces of what happens to that self-awareness in deep sleep, what happens to that self-awareness in coma, where the material individual in the brain may even be there, may not be functioning optimally, but is absolutely there in front of you. But we don't view that as a conscious entity. So I don't have a good answer. I think, I won't be able to give you a good answer because I consider myself a bit of an agnostic on this, in that I don't want to take a hard position, partly because I'm not sure what the real answer is. And I'd like to leave the room for the possibility that this is something that mankind will continue to explore and may not necessarily nail down. I think fundamentally there's something these molecules are tapping into which exists within each of us as it is. And if it brings us to spaces that make us more compassionate, far less likely to be hijacked by ideas that our tribal brain is extremely programmed to. We are tribally programmed to want to other somebody to protect, right? Given that tendency, nationhood and religion are two ideas that our brain is programmed to gravitate towards. And because of that, they are extremely powerful political tools to polarize society. I think it opens up very interesting questions of what could happen if society started to cease to see these boundaries between one and the other. And certainly psychedelics tap into that space, but I think other things also tap into that sort of space. And so I think it's pushing us as a species to interrogate ourselves in a more deeper manner. And they're powerful tools that allow us to do that. So, yeah.
Right. So, just last quick question is that you said that when it hits the serotonin receptor, it fires the mitochondria, which releases more energy.
Yeah.
And so, you feel better. So I get that then whatever experiences people say about psychedelics, you might feel more energetic or more creative, or it opens up, synesthesia in your brain. But I didn't quite fully understand how does it then play back into stress or change your...
Yeah.
And then is that at all permanent? Do we have any idea? Australia has just cleared clinical trials. America is now clearing clinical trials for human beings. Can you separate the hallucinatory qualities? Because, while we are romanticizing these drugs, which, as you said, our cultures have had it, 14,000 years ago, the shamans were using it. But at the same time, when you have it, it also cuts you off from the rest of people around you because you're then on a different plane, and you're hallucinating. And so it is a bit of an explosive drug as well, So what are your thoughts on that?
So in terms of psychiatric disorders like anxiety and depression, they are self-referential disorders in that it is the self that is at the center and perceiving a sense of distress with the world that it is in, right? So things that allow you to slip out of a highly self-referential framework would be potent ways via which you could cope, and that certainly can happen sometimes with therapy, can happen it happens in a combination of therapy and drugs. So that's one of the ideas, that what might be happening in individuals who either have severe PTSD or anxiety or depression is that this shift in network is one way via which you might have a therapeutic effect. The other possibility is that it opens the possibility of plastic changes in the brain because they promote plasticity. Both serotonin does it, so do psychedelics. And because they allow significant shift in plasticity, they allow you and I are making plastic responses all the time. It's just that these molecules create a window in which plasticity is scaled up significantly more. So it allows you to set shift from a negative state to one that might be positive. Jury's out on how long this lasts and how effective it is, and whether it's pretty dramatic in terms of some of the effects that have been reported, but jury's out because we need to look more deeply, and I can't unfortunately give you I wish there were magic pills, but there never are. And so this isn't going to be one of those that just you throw out there and is necessarily going to solve everything. So that sort of answers the first part. The second part was, what did you want me to answer? Now I forgot. I lost track. Yeah. The hallucinatory elements, are there ones which don't evoke hallucinations?
No, I was saying, can you separate its destructive qualities from, given that science is where you can...
So again, you've picked a point which has caused a lot of controversy between people who study psychedelics, in particular in humans, where people believe that the subjective experience is vital to the therapeutic effects eventually. And then there are those who say it's the molecular actions of these molecules, in which case you could segregate and perhaps have those molecular effects without having the altered sensory percept and altered sense of reality. If you talk to David Olson's lab, and David Olson, he would tell you that they've designed molecules that come from iboga plant. It's a molecule called tabernathalog. It does not produce any hallucinations and produces potent antidepressant-like effects in rodent models, not in the clinic yet, but it is that. If you talk to David Yaden and others at Hopkins, they will tell you you need that subjective experience of a shift in consciousness to get the therapeutic effect. So right now you have a divided audience on that. I'll tell you what we find in our work. The psychedelic, so serotonin gives you these potent mitochondrial effects and gives you plasticity. Psychedelics do it as well. Non-psychedelics, non-hallucinogenic drugs that hit the same receptor also do it. They just do it slower, and they're not as potent as the psychedelics. Now, that doesn't yet point out to whether the hallucination is necessary. But once we understand this, we can design drugs that can segregate these effects. It is possible to do that. I think that's where the future will lie. Can we tap into understanding the underlying biochemistry? So we can actually extract the effects that we want and perhaps not necessarily have the risks associated with a psychotic break or with the altered sense of reality. But jury out on that. I think it'll take another decade before we really have a good answer to that.
Vidita, you've been pushing for this research in India. Like you said, we carry DMT in our body. You said that's the most potent drug on the planet, and we are literally the factory of DMT. But as of now, the government and our regulations don't allow you to even research this because you can't produce those drugs in the country. So you're really pioneering that. I think there are many fascinating questions, which I hope, again, next edition, it just opens up this whole idea of consciousness. And it's fascinating that our mystical savants, 4,000, 5,000 years ago, could talk about the ego self dying down. Possibly they were all taking these chemicals, so the big question is divinity, is mystical experiences, is the idea of God itself a psychedelic thought? Or is it, as you said earlier, that it actually opens your brain to access another reality altogether? And I know that's another frontier of science and exploration, but it's fascinating to have you open these doors for us and to make us look at the possibility that if our ego self dies down, a lot of our illnesses can, be healed as well. So thank you so much, Vidita, for this fascinating conversation. Thank you.